Kat Timpf built her career on chaos, anti-routine, anti-rules, anti-romance. She once joked that she'd die alone in a studio apartment with a cat and zero furniture, not because she couldn't afford it, but because commitment to anything felt like a trap. The woman who made millions laugh at the absurdity of modern life seemed allergic to the very things most people crave: stability, permanence, roots. Yet today, she wakes up between 4 different homes: Manhattan, the Hamptons, Los Angeles, Miami, next to a man who quietly redefined every defense mechanism she'd spent decades building. Cameron Friscia didn't try to tame her. He didn't ask her to soften. He simply existed in a way that made her question whether strength and stillness could coexist. This is the story of a woman who promised herself she'd never get married, never have children, never settle into the predictable rhythms of domesticity. Then she met someone who made her rewrite every punchline she'd ever written about love. Someone whose calm matched her storm so perfectly that the contradiction dissolved. But here's where it gets strange. Hours before giving birth to her first child, doctors discovered early-stage breast cancer. The timing was so bizarre, so statistically improbable, that she called it a miracle, because the pregnancy scan that found new life also caught the cells trying to take it away. In that moment, the comedian who'd spent years mocking fate found herself face-to-face with it. This isn't just a celebrity profile. It's the anatomy of transformation. How a girl raised in Detroit's decline became the voice of a generation unwilling to choose sides, and how the soldier she swiped right on became the anchor she never knew she needed. Kat Timpf was born into a city learning how to fall apart gracefully. Detroit in the mid-1980s was a study in contrasts: factory smoke still rising against gray skies, economic decline creeping through neighborhoods that once hummed with prosperity. Her father came home exhausted from shifts that paid less each year. Her mother, Polish Catholic and unshakable, managed household chaos with the kind of dark humor that becomes family currency during hard times. At 5 years old, Kat was diagnosed with ADHD, not the trendy kind that gets managed with apps and productivity hacks, the kind that made her a target, the kind that turned school hallways into gauntlets. Classmates sensed difference the way animals sense weakness, and they pounced. She was bullied relentlessly, isolated systematically. The loneliness carved so deep that by middle school, she'd started cutting, small wounds on skin that felt less painful than the ones inside her head. But somewhere in that darkness, she discovered a weapon sharper than any blade: words. She learned that humor could disarm bullies faster than tears. That sarcasm created distance when proximity hurt too much. That if she wrote the joke first, she controlled the narrative. Voice became defense. Defense became identity. Lutheran High North gave her a stage. Small classrooms meant she couldn't hide, and for the first time, that worked in her favor. School plays, student journalism, debate team. Every time her words earned applause instead of ridicule, she stockpiled evidence that maybe, just maybe, the thing that made her weird could also make her valuable. What began as survival would later become her brand. But in those formative years, it was simply the difference between drowning and treading water. The call came when Kat was 26. Her mother's heart was failing. Not from any dramatic event, but from something far crueler: cardiac amyloidosis, a disease so rare and so often misdiagnosed that by the time doctors understood what was happening, it was too late. Anne-Marie Timpf died in 2014, and with her went every illusion Kat had about permanence. At the time, Kat was living in a studio apartment so small her yoga mat doubled as a dining table. She was working unpaid internships, surviving on hope and ramen, convinced that hustle would eventually equal success. Her mother's death didn't just shatter that optimism, it revealed something darker underneath. If love could disappear overnight, if the most stable presence in her life could evaporate without warning, then what was the point of trusting anything? This is where the armor thickened, where her jokes about dying alone stopped being jokes and started being strategy. Attachment meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant pain. So she'd build a life around movement, around never staying in one place, physically or emotionally, long enough for loss to find her again. But before the armor fully calcified, there was Hillsdale College. From 2006 to 2010, the small Michigan liberal arts school gave her something Detroit couldn't: intellectual rigor wrapped in libertarian ideals, freedom as philosophy, not just feeling, individual responsibility as the only moral framework worth defending, professors who taught her that words could be weapons and architecture, that you could tear down bad ideas while building better ones. That mix of grief, grit, and dark wit became her formula. Not for happiness, she'd given up on that, but for survival. And survival, it turned out, was enough to build a career on. The early grind bordered on masochism. Kat worked 4 a.m. helicopter traffic reports for radio stations that paid in exposure. She picked up diner shifts that ran until 2 a.m., slept 3 hours, then did it again. This wasn't ambition. It was self-punishment disguised as hustle, the kind of schedule you keep when sitting still means remembering things you'd rather forget. Her breakthrough came from an unlikely source: Campus Reform, a conservative watchdog site documenting absurdity in higher education. Kat's pieces, exposing trigger warnings on Greek tragedies, safe spaces from opposing viewpoints, professors mandating pronoun declarations, went viral not because they were partisan, but because they were funny. She had a gift for finding the absurd in the self-serious, for making readers laugh at things that usually just made them angry. Her voice evolved from humor into commentary, bridging the gap between Jon Stewart's satire and Rush Limbaugh's outrage. She was neither. She was something new, irreverent without being nihilistic, critical without being cruel, libertarian without being cold. The first real viral moment came in 2015 on Greg Gutfeld's late-night Fox News show. A throwaway joke about climate change celebrities, something about private jets and moral superiority, hit 50,000 shares in 24 hours. Fox executives noticed. Gutfeld called her personally. Within months, she had a seat on the panel. But success didn't erase exhaustion. Every laugh on camera hid the residue of loss. The 4 a.m. alarm clocks that never quite left her nervous system, the muscle memory of survival mode that couldn't turn off even when survival was no longer in question. Fox News became Kat's accelerator. From panel guest to co-host of The Specialists, she carved out a niche as the libertarian wildcard, equally willing to mock conservative hypocrisy and progressive overreach. But the show's abrupt cancellation in 2017, following a colleague's sexual harassment scandal, reminded her that proximity to power meant proximity to its consequences. Then came Sincerely, Kat. The 2019 YouTube series was an experiment in radical honesty. She removed her false eyelashes on camera, took off the TV makeup, peeled away the performance layers that made her palatable for primetime. For 7 minutes, viewers saw something raw. A woman admitting she'd built a career on not caring what people thought while being terrified they'd stop watching. The video hit 2.3 million views. Comments flooded in from women who'd spent years performing their own versions of invincibility. Kat had gambled that vulnerability would be career suicide. Instead, it became her most powerful weapon. But 2017 also taught her that visibility comes with violence. At Brooklyn's Union Pool, a stranger threw water in her face mid-conversation. No warning. No reason beyond political rage. The attack was quick, humiliating, and unsolved, a reminder that fame and female outspokenness collide in ways male commentators rarely experience. The water on her head became a metaphor. For years, online hate had tried to drown her voice. This time it was literal. And just like before, she refused to retreat. She tweeted about it, joked about it, then went back on air. Humor as rebellion. Laughter as the only response to people trying to make you smaller. By 2023, Kat had weaponized her contradictions into literature. You can't joke about that. Why Everything is Funny, Nothing is Sacred, and We're All in This Together was part memoir, part manifesto. She argued, with statistics, trauma, and punchlines, that comedy was the last space for uncomfortable truths. That sanitizing humor meant sanitizing thought. That offense was subjective, but censorship was objective harm. Conservatives celebrated it as an anti-woke Bible. Progressives called it dangerous. Kat shrugged at both. She'd never claimed to be anyone's soldier. Her 2024 follow-up, "I Used to Like You Until How Binary Thinking Divides Us," went further. She confessed her views on sexuality, drug legalization, and cancel culture, positions that made both sides uncomfortable. She wrote about sleeping with people she disagreed with politically, about finding humanity in opponents, about refusing to let ideology override lived experience. The backlash was immediate and bipartisan. But it was her 3-hour conversation on Joe Rogan's podcast that cemented her intellectual fearlessness. No talking points, no media training, just two people sparring over ideas for hours, willing to be wrong if it meant being honest. The lesson was clear. Kat wasn't anti-woke or pro-MAGA. She was pro-freedom, even when it cost her comfort, even when it alienated audiences, even when it meant standing in no man's land while both sides fired. The 2019 swipe right should have been nothing. Kat had trained herself to expect nothing. But Cameron Friscia was different in ways she didn't have language for yet. West Point graduate, Army Ranger, Afghanistan veteran, lacrosse player turned finance executive. On paper, he was everything her world wasn't: structured, disciplined, quiet, the kind of composed energy that either clashes with chaos or complements it. Their first date was a study in contrasts. She told TV stories with her hands, fast and loud and self-deprecating. He told war stories from Kunar province with measured calm, letting silence do the heavy lifting. Two incompatible worlds clicking for reasons neither could articulate. What struck her wasn't that he tolerated her loudness. Most men did, confusing tolerance with acceptance. What struck her was that he respected it. He didn't try to fix her, didn't suggest meditation or routine or any of the things well-meaning people suggest to high-functioning disasters. He simply existed beside her, proof that strength and stillness weren't opposites. There's a metaphor in that, a soldier teaching a comedian that silence can be powerful. That restraint isn't weakness, that maybe the thing she'd been running from, stability, wasn't a cage, but a foundation. The pandemic forced the question. Lockdown cohabitation meant confronting her fear of routine in real time. She'd spent her entire adult life avoiding this exact scenario, waking up next to the same person, in the same space, with nowhere to escape. But instead of suffocation, she found comfort. Instead of boredom, she found peace. For someone who'd built a career on cynicism, the discovery was destabilizing. Cameron's proposal came with a custom ring and Kat's trademark response: panic instead of tears. But this time, panic mixed with something else: curiosity. Not certainty, but the willingness to find out. Their May 2021 wedding was perfectly them. Adam Sandler, a surprise friend from the comedy circuit, wrote a song. A neon sign reading "Till Death" glowed behind the altar. Kennedy Montgomery, her Fox News colleague, officiated with the kind of irreverence you can't script. It was funny, personal, and deeply weird. Everything a wedding should be and rarely is. The emotional shift was subtle but seismic. Kat used to see marriage as a cage, a social contract that trapped people in predictable patterns. Now it felt like collaboration, like two people choosing each other daily instead of once, like independence through commitment, not despite it. Her post-wedding Instagram statement surprised even longtime fans. "I feel freer than I ever have." The woman who'd spent decades equating freedom with solitude had discovered that sometimes the right partnership unlocks parts of yourself you didn't know existed, including the part that could imagine being someone's mother. Pregnancy in 2024 collided with career peak. Gutfeld was winning late-night ratings. Her books were best-selling, podcasts, columns, speaking tours. The machine she'd built was running perfectly. And in the middle of it all, she was growing a human. Then came the twist. 15 hours before labor, a routine scan found something that wasn't supposed to be there. Stage 0 breast cancer, caught so early it was almost theoretical, but real enough to require surgery. Real enough to reframe everything. The panic was private. The humor was public. She posted a hospital selfie with the caption, "Plot twist, baby on the way, cancer on the way out." The internet erupted. Millions of messages from women who'd survived similar scares, from fans inspired by her refusal to let terror win. But behind the jokes was the duality she'd mastered, humor shielding genuine fear. The baby that arrived was a literal new life, interrupting mortality. Doctors scheduled a double mastectomy for March 2025, right after she'd recovered from childbirth. The timing was absurd enough to be funny, which made it survivable. Her triumphant return to Gutfeld in late March included the line, "I'm boob-free and cancer-free." And honestly, the first part is the bigger adjustment. The audience laughed, then stood, because by then they understood what Kat had always known. Sometimes the only way through darkness is to make it punchline. Cameron Friscia exists in the space most celebrity spouses occupy, deliberately invisible. From ranger school to Cotu management, his life reads like an alternate universe to Kat's chaos. Wall Street composure built on military discipline. A man who survived firefights in Afghanistan by staying calm under pressure. Useful training for living with someone whose job is controlled chaos. His West Point education wasn't just about military tactics. It was about learning to function under impossible conditions, to make decisions when every option carries risk, to lead without ego. Those lessons translated seamlessly into finance, where he analyzes tech investments with the same precision he once used to assess combat situations. At Coatu, he's known for being unflappable during market volatility, for seeing patterns others miss, for understanding that sustainable growth requires patience. But it's the invisible work he does at home that defines him. He almost never appears on camera, despite countless requests from producers who see the narrative gold in a veteran married to a provocateur. He doesn't court attention, doesn't need validation from strangers, prefers cooking elaborate dinners at home, walking the dog through Central Park before sunrise, keeping Kat grounded when the internet tries to launch her into space. They split time between 4 homes: Manhattan for work, where deadlines and live TV dominate; Hamptons for peace, where they can remember what silence sounds like; LA for industry events that require her presence, but not her soul; Miami for escape, where neither has professional obligations, and they can just exist. Luxury cars became their shared indulgence: a Porsche, a Range Rover, a nod to 2 people who once lived on scraps and never forgot what hunger feels like, even when the checking account says otherwise. The contrast works because it's complementary rather than contradictory. His finance world is predictable, measured, quantifiable, spreadsheets and earnings reports and data-driven decisions. Her media circus is none of those things. It's reactive, emotional, built on instinct and timing, and reading room temperature in real time. The balance keeps them both functional, his calm lowering her anxiety when Twitter mobs gather, her chaos reminding him that life isn't combat logistics, that spontaneity isn't the enemy of structure. Friends describe him as Kat's secret weapon, the person who celebrates her wins without needing credit, who weathered her cancer diagnosis with the same steady presence he brought to everything else, who understood that being her partner meant protecting her space to be loud while offering her permission to be quiet. For a woman who made a career out of not belonging, she'd finally found someone who let her be entirely herself, not despite the contradictions, but because of them, not by changing her, but by creating a home stable enough that she could finally stop running. Kat Timpf at 36 is a synthesis of everyone she used to be: TV host, comedian, author, cancer survivor, wife, mother. Each role once seemed impossible, evidence that she was constitutionally incapable of traditional success. Now they coexist, messily, imperfectly, but authentically. Her impact is measurable in millions. Young women citing her as proof you can be irreverent and resilient. Libertarians pointing to her as evidence the movement isn't just old men yelling about taxes. Comedians learning that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the highest form of courage. Late-night ratings prove she's not just filling a niche, she's creating one, showing networks that audiences are hungry for voices that refuse to be categorized. The cultural shift she represents is subtle but seismic. For decades, media demanded you pick a lane: serious journalist or comedian, conservative or liberal, vulnerable or strong. Kat obliterated those boundaries. She cries on camera about her mother's death, then roasts politicians with surgical precision. She writes about sexual freedom and Second Amendment rights in the same essay. She's proof that complexity isn't confusion, it's honesty. Her writing evolved from defensive humor into something more dangerous, philosophical comedy. The jokes still land, but now they carry questions underneath. What does freedom mean when everyone's terrified of offense? Can you love people you disagree with? Is cynicism a shield or a prison? She doesn't answer these questions. She forces readers to sit with them, to laugh at their own certainty. The cancer diagnosis added another layer. Suddenly, her humor about mortality wasn't abstract. It was literal. The jokes about dying alone became jokes about almost dying young. And in that shift, something crystallized. Kat's entire career had been preparation for the moment when laughter was the only weapon left. When doctors said cancer, and she said, well, at least it'll make good material, she wasn't being flippant. She was accessing the survival mechanism she'd been building since childhood. But maybe the real legacy is what she's teaching the next generation. That you don't have to choose between being funny and being serious. That changing your mind isn't weakness. It's intelligence responding to new information. That the girl who swore off marriage and motherhood can embrace both without betraying her younger self, because growth isn't betrayal, it's evolution. There's old footage floating online. Kat in her mid-20s, joking that she'd die alone with a cat named after a dictator. Cut to present day, her holding a newborn, Cameron beside her, both smiling at something off camera. The comments section is divided between people calling her a sellout and people calling her an inspiration. She'd probably laugh at both, because the truth is simpler. She's neither. Maybe the biggest joke of all is that the girl who swore off happy endings finally got one, and it's funnier, louder, and more real than anything she ever scripted, because the punchline wasn't, she changed her mind. The punchline was, she was always capable of this. She just needed to survive long enough to find out. And for someone who spent her whole life learning to survive, that's the only ending that ever made sense. Not because it's tidy or triumphant, but because it's true. The armor didn't disappear. It just learned when to soften. The jokes didn't stop. They just deepened. And the woman who built a career on not belonging finally found a place where belonging didn't mean losing herself.